No.
Good. Well, good afternoon. My name is Glenn Johnston, and I'm a professor of history at Stevenson University over near Owings Mills, Maryland. And today I'm at Todd's Inheritance, one of the great gems of southeastern Baltimore County. Todd commemorates a time when Baltimore County history extended back into the 1600s. The Todds were here in that time frame, and the Todds are hanging around ever since. They do a tremendous job of interpreting the history of Patapsco Neck, telling the story of Todd's inheritance, and telling the story of the Todds family. There's also a great cemetery here, the Todd Family Cemetery, and it's right near North Point State Park, and it's right near Fort Howard Park. So there's lots of things to do when you come down here to visit. It's located at 9000 North Point Road, just near Edgemere, Maryland. I'm here today to be talking about recreational fishing grounds on Bear Creek along Patapsco Neck. Patapsco Neck is literally almost a peninsula that sticks out into, it's bounded on one side by the Patapsco River, on the other side by Back River, and on the far depth end of it, farthest point out by Chesapeake Bay. And consequently it's called a neck, and because it's bounded on the south by the Patapsco River, it got the name Patapsco Neck. If you look into the history of the state of Maryland, Patapsco Neck and Patapsco River figure all the way going back to the early sailings of John Smith of Virginia fame. So it goes back a couple of hundred years and is worthy of recognition and worthy of study. I have two roles that I'm playing today. One role is as a professor of history from Stevenson University, but the other role is as principal investigator for a grant for the historical study of Bear Creek that was awarded to NeighborSpace of Baltimore County, which is a local 501c3 committed to developing community. And as part of that historical study, for the last year and a half, I and a number of other historians and a number of people in this room have been studying Bear Creek and Patapsco Neck to a great depth. I'm humbled by the fact that some of the people in this room have been studying Patapsco Neck and Bear Creek for decades, and I just got into it within the last couple of years, so I'm a newbie. But with that, let me move on to what we're going to talk about with Bear Creek. Who were the fishing grounds? What were the fishing grounds? Unless you're from this part of Maryland, unless you're from the Chesapeake, the phrase fishing grounds may not mean much to you. When I began to take a look at the historical maps of this area, I began to notice that there were things called fishing grounds with odd names. Japanese fishing grounds, Jewish fishing grounds, other fishing grounds, and I didn't really know what that meant. And as we began to take a look at it, we realized that from about 1835, 1840, up through roughly 1940, 1950, this area was filled with recreational opportunities that were called clubs, they were called fishing grounds, they were called ducking grounds, they were called lots of things. But they were places people came to spend time, often on a weekend or on a vacation, to engage in fun activities. Many of the people know the name Japanese fishing grounds or Jewish fishing grounds, but here are the names of the others along Bear Creek that fit into that name as well. Avondale, Bright Lights, Cedars, Chesterwood, Holly Grove, Japanese fishing grounds, Long Branch, the Monumental Fishing Grounds, Schmidt's Pavilion, Brown's Pavilion, Central Fishing Club, Forest Grove, Houck's Pavilion, the Jewish Fishing Grounds, Lynch's Landing, Orchard Grove, and Walnut Grove. Those were the ones that were on Bear Creek. Now there's other places on Patapsco Neck where there were also other fishing grounds and recreational areas. I'm not addressing those today. I believe Kevin Garrity will be addressing those in a forthcoming talk. But these are the ones kind of focused on the Bear Creek area. It's important to know that many of these names were layered on an existing fishing ground. So for example, Houck's Pavilion later on became Brown's Pavilion. Avondale later on became two other fishing grounds and recreation areas. So what these names are really here for is so that when you do research, especially if you're doing research in the Baltimore Sun, local newspapers, maybe the Dundalk Eagle, shout out to one of the best small newspapers I've ever dealt with. In order to get the full story of fishing grounds on Bear Creek, these are the names that you have to be looking at. Because unless you search under all these different names, you're not going to get the full story. And some of these fishing grounds have many, many articles associated with them, and some may only have one small one. So where were these? You know, here's a location of a few. Bear Creek starts kind of down around here at Suller's Point. Just up from the entrance is where we had Avondale, which at the time this map was made were the free excursion grounds for the poor of the city. You're going to hear a lot about that today, because my jaw dropped when I read about Avondale and the opportunities that were going on in Avondale in the late 1800s. Up here is the Monumental Fishing Grounds.
Is Stansbury going to be where Chesterwood is?
Yeah.
Is that it?
Yeah. So once again, we have layers of names kind of in the same spot. If we come further up the creek, up toward its head, we have the Jewish Fishing Grounds down here, the Japanese Fishing Grounds up here, and then the Long Branch Fishing Shore right on the other side of Bread and Cheese Creek. There's a bunch of others listed in here. So for example, we're on Houck's Pavilion, and later Brown's is located down here. The Battleground Hotel is located up here. The Monumental Hotel is located over there. So these are kind of all along the shores of Bear Creek and the main roads along Patapsco Neck. And it makes it easy because there was really only two main roads coming out to the neck. One was Trapp Road, and the other is North Point Road. Advertising. I'll be honest, when you go to Teacher Preparation 101 and you learn about PowerPoints and you learn about the people who you give talks to, the first thing you're told is minimize the amount of text on the PowerPoint. Don't put too much on there. Make it nice, crisp bullets. No, I'm not doing that. And the reason I'm not doing that is because a lot of these newspaper articles, you can't begin to catch the spirit of what was happening unless you literally read the words of the classified ad, or you literally read the words or hear the words of the person writing the article. So this is to give you an idea of the kinds of things that they offered in these fishing grounds. Ho, for the 4th of July, the first grand family excursion of the young Fanny Fern Socials to Monumental Fishing Grove on the Swift Street steamer George Law, Friday, July 4th, 1879. An adult ticket, 25 cents. child's ticket 15 cents. There will be a grand yacht race, a tub race, a pulling race, sack race, a running race, swimming, match, greasy pole climbing, greasy pig catching.
Oh,
Sounds like fun.
Professor Thomas J. Charles Band has been engaged for the occasion. If necessary, there will be another steamer chartered. The steamer will leave the Grove to depart back home at 8 p.m. for those who wish to be in the city at 9. Tickets can be purchased at, and they name all these different places. That gives you an idea of, in 1879, what was drawing people to these places to engage in recreation. If we head over here, excursion on the 4th of July to the battleground at North Point. Well, now we're up at the head of Bear Creek. We're up around Houck's Pavilion area. Battleground at North Point. The steamboat Virginia, Captain Parrish, will leave the lower end of Spears Wharf on Saturday morning, the 4th of July at 10 o'clock on an excursion to this place and land her passengers at Dr. Houck's on Bear Creek. One of the most beautiful places in the country. The accommodations there are the very best. Those disposed can enjoy themselves at fishing, as there are an abundance of fishing crabs to be had. Mr. Houck will furnish dinner for passengers by this boat. Passage there and back, 75 cents. Children half price. And then it tells you where you can purchase the tickets. Yes.
Do you know about what year that
This.
1800s also?
Yeah.
Late 1800s, the Hawks Pavilion?
Right, right. This actually may be older than this. This is, I believe, 1879. This, I believe, is around like 1840, 1841.
Wow. That's way back in the day.
Right. So, Houck's,
That would be where Bear Creek Elementary is today, right?
right up near there.
Right there.
So Houck's Pavilion was right at Charles Mont Park. If you-
Across the street from Charlesmont Park, right? No. Like
In where the park is.
it was in Charlesmont Park, or it was across the street at that, where the steps go down into the water?
So when you look at the map and you see that north of Charlesmont, it's all built up, and then you got Charlesmont Park right down
Right at
leading
the
to the
edge by the
creek.
water.
In an indeterminate place in Charlesmont Park is where Houck's Pavilion was.
Okay.
There was a road that went directly north from Houck's Pavilion up to North Point Road, and near that intersection of that
Oh, I know exactly.
road
what you're talking
and
about.
North Point is where the Houck's, it was initially Houck's Battleground Hotel.
He's actually the person that donated the land for the.
Right,
For the
for
Battle
Battle
Acre.
Acre.
Okay.
Right. And I may or may not talk about it further on, but Houck and his sons were marketing geniuses in that he is working on his Houck's Panacea in the city of Baltimore. He's making a lot of money on this snake oil that he's selling. And it's selling nationwide. And it's selling for the equivalent of today's money, $35 a bottle. And the instructions on it for dosage are, you need a tablespoon at breakfast, a tablespoon at lunch, if you find it agreeable, another one, and if you want more, take more. If you finish the bottle, there's another one waiting for you, okay? The ingredients in Houck's Panacea were 25 gallons of rye whiskey, 150 pounds of sugar, 25 pounds of wood bark, a pound of juniper oil, and half a pound of lemon oil. Mix that all together, and that's Houck's Panacea, which some of you got to taste on May 9th.
delicious.
Through that money, he was able to purchase 2 tracts of land at the head of Bear Creek. One was 1 acre, the other was a little over 43 acres, and they adjoined each other. He made a big deal in the summer, right before Defenders Day of 1839, donating the 1 acre to the state to be used by the veterans and the community to commemorate the battle in perpetuity. Very nice of the guy. But you begin to see his marketing brilliance when you understand that at the same time, he's building a hotel right next door on his 43 acres that will be there to service the people who will go to that 1 acre he just donated to the state. The difference between these two is that these are largely, you can tell, games and activities. Here he's talking more about fishing. And that's really the two families that these recreation grounds fell into. You were either there as a mini amusement park, no rides but lots of activities, or you were there for fishing and duck hunting. And that's really how the two split. If you were just there for fishing and duck hunting, high probability you were a private club. Houck's was one of the few, Houck's Pavilion and Battleground Hotel, that offered the fishing and duck hunting to anybody who wanted to come stay there. Most of the others were private clubs, including the Japanese fishing grounds, the Jewish fishing grounds, so on and so forth. What did they offer? Well, we covered a little bit of that. Free summer excursion. So what I really want you to pay attention to here is this is Avondale. This is that recreation area for the city's poor that we saw on the map a couple of slides ago. Free summer excursion. The first free excursion of the season for mothers and children took place to Avondale yesterday on the steamer Columbia, Captain A.B. Fields. The steamer was gratuitously employed in the service of the association. She left her wharf on Light Street at 8 a.m. with 500 mothers and children, receiving an additional 100 or more excursionists at Henderson's Wharf. The steamer reached Avondale, Bear Creek, safely at 9 a.m., and the ladies and gentlemen of the committee were kept busy the rest of the day administering to the wands of the beneficiaries. Beneficiaries being young mothers and children and the infirm. Poor people. The managers, having had several years' experience, listen to this is amazing. They've now systemized things so that the commissary department was regulated admirably. In the first place, the food was prepared for distribution in one of the shelters. Over 1,600 ham sandwiches were made, which were sent to distributing tents flying red and blue colors. Tickets of corresponding colors were distributed for breakfast so as to divide the crowd. Coffee was dealt out in a tent, and blue tents and milk was furnished at the tent flying a white flag. In a tent under orange colors, the sick were attended to by doctors, so on and so forth. This is incredible. It's, I believe, their 4th year of operation. It is a highly, you can tell, honed operation. And they take kids off the streets, they take moms and kids off of absolutely horrible tenement apartments who rarely see sunlight, who don't get much fresh air, and they get them on a boat and they send them out. And all of this is paid for by donors from the city. Continuing. Breakfast was greatly relished by young and old, as well as dinner and an evening meal, the latter comprising cake and milk. For recreation, the older children were indulged in various sports about the grounds, swinging and dancing and playing. A band of Italian strolling musicians with harps and violins furnished dancing music in the pavilion. In another locality, the House of Refuge brass band of youths played a number of popular airs, and in one of the large assembly shelters, the ladies and gentlemen of the committees from time to time played on the cabinet organ, accompaniments to hymns in the singing of which many of the excursionists joined. The grounds at Avondale have been greatly improved during the spring months and are now very well suited to the wants of the association. Under charge of Mr. Brown, resident keeper, the several buildings have been kept in order and the grounds carefully tended. Flowers and vines have been planted around the Levering Cottage by younger members of the committee who not only contributed plants, but have themselves worked up the flower beds. Some rare and valuable plants now in bloom were contributed by the Horticultural Department of Washington. The pines, which chiefly constitute the shade, have grown considerably since the first season at Avondale. Listen to this. Bathing houses for mothers and children were occupied all day, and the swings in the groves never stopped. Okay, 21st century, Glenn grew up in New York City, bathing house, I don't know. It's got a bathtub, and they're giving free bathtubs. Cool. No. After some more research, you find out that all along the creek, they had dug out tidal concrete and wood baths so that you step down into the water the same way you would jump in to swim. In this case, it's you step down into a concrete and wood tub, and you would luxuriate there. You take it easy there. You paddle around there. You do whatever, but it's there for bathing as opposed to swimming. And if you think of the fact that, at least on this trip, it's a lot of young moms and young children without means, I'm not sure how many of them really want to be out swimming, but they sure as heck want to be in bathing. And the fact that it wasn't any special water, it was just Bear Creek. Comes in through the sluice, and when the tide goes out, it goes out a little bit as well. The thought of, to these people who have the least in the city, the people who we don't pay much attention to in the city, that we're giving them a band of Italian strolling musicians with harps and violins, the fact that we're giving them this food, the fact that we're giving them these activities, that we care enough to provide the pines for shade and the flower beds, it talks to me about the level of philanthropic and community-based organizing that was going on in the city of Baltimore at the time, because this was all paid for by the residents of the city.
What year was that, approximately?
This would have been somewhere between 1879 and 1884.
Are we talking Water's Edge? Is that where this is?
Avondale, no.
So Avondale is kind of, so you got Solar Point, then you got, what is it, Peach, or is it?
Orchard Cove?
Yeah, the Cove, right to, at the western end and north of the Cove is where this was.
So it's like, if you were going into Water's Edge and you looked over at where Southeastern Votech used to be, and you got all those weeds and everything growing right there. So
So,
the old track and field used to be, all that.
so here you go.
But that is where Water's Edge is.
Yeah, but it's right on the outside of Water's Edge. It's when you drive into Water's Edge, look over to the right where the basketball courts start. It became something else years later, and it was owned by Dr. Joseph Thomas. He had an
Yeah,
amusement park there.
Yeah, and as I said at the beginning, part of the problem of figuring out the history of this is all these overlaying, well, it's like land patents.
Well, you can add, the best way to research these places are old newspapers. That's the way you get the story.
Right?
Was it integrated?
Excuse me?
No.
Was it integrated?
No, but it was integrated to the point that they would have days for African Americans and days for white folks. They would have at least, I think, 2 or 3 trips per summer for African American folks who were indigent from the city, And they would have, not necessarily Avondale, but at these other places, specific days for African American churches and African American community organizations to come and recreate. There was a great article I read about how there was a African American church that went on one of these to a fishing ground, and the reporter was like, they didn't want to do anything that white people do. They didn't want to dance. They didn't want to, catch the greased pig. They loved the organ, and they sang hymns all day. They sang hymns. They prayed. They enjoyed the shade. They walked. They ate. It was a day off for them, and they loved it. So, yeah.
Now join the subject because I wondered the question for a while. The Japanese fishing grounds and the Jewish fishing grounds, are they what they sound like? They're racially segregated only for those people? How do they get their
No,
names?
so the Jewish fishing grounds were never a public place. They were never even really a club. They ended up on the map as the Jewish fishing grounds, but what they were a small peninsula sticking out into Bear Creek that a number of Jewish families from the city had settled on, and that's where they had their community beach, and it got labeled as the Jewish fishing grounds,
Okay.
but it never reached
It's like
the
a
level.
Jewish settlement.
Right. It never reached the level of take a steamer here and so on and so forth. The Japanese fishing grounds, on the other hand, which is up north on Back River, never had anything to do with Japan or Asia. It was just a name that was kind of exciting to use. It was exotic, an exotic name, and it was a private club. And for that club, you had to be extremely wealthy or extremely powerful in the city. And that gained you entrance to the Japanese fishing grounds. And you didn't buy a day ticket. You had to buy in by the season.
Okay.
So you paid a certain amount of money.
It's like a
and-
country club. Huh?
Right. So, and I know some of you may find this a strange item for me to say, but Patapsco Neck was a gift from God. It really was. It had things going for it that the city didn't. It had things going for it that other places did, because this was a real ongoing industry. When you take a look at the excursions leaving the city of Baltimore during the summers, from 1845 up through roughly 1940, these steamships are going all the way down to St. Michael's. They're going down the eastern shore, western shore. It just so happens that Bear Creek is the closest. And because it's the closest and they can make multiple trips, it's the most highly used. And Bear Creek had fishing, ducks, geese, orchards, boating, swimming, shade trees, and it was rural. There was a time where Bear Creek was a rural place. There was a time when Patapsco Neck was a rural place. And we had maybe 58 families living on Patapsco Neck. And even by the time we reach the early 1900s, Patapsco Neck is still very much a rural place.
Glenn,
Yes.
when did they start putting the parks in around the city to get people also to have recreation?
So, I don't know.
I imagine it's in the.
So when, in the early 1900s, we had Olmsted, the park designer, had come down here and was developing a plan for the city of Baltimore. Because coming out of the late 1800s, there was this general recognition of the fact that we needed park space, and that park space was healthy for city people. When the city burned in 1904, that gave Baltimore a real opportunity the city of Baltimore, to put into place some of the ideas that Olmsted and his sons had for the city. So there were some things that, if you're an Olmsted aficionado, you'll be able to meet each of them in the city of Baltimore that came about as a result of the city burning.
Olmsted did Sherwood Gardens, did they design that? No?
Say again?
Did they design Sherwood Gardens?
Yeah, they did parks, like Central Park up in New York City, and Delaware Park in Buffalo.
And the parks, the book that we have in here it was related to the trolley companies, because they put it in 4 different places around the city for people to be able to get on the trolley and then go and have recreation. And probably these places were also
So,
on that.
these places in the 1800s, which is when I'm primarily talking about,
You can only get back up.
were often in business with the steamboat operators.
Yeah, that makes sense.
In that, in the same way that Haupt donated an acre to get people to stay at his hotel next door, if you set up a fishing ground and said they will come, well, they're not going to come unless there's transportation. So you find that the steamboat companies and the fishing grounds, the public fishing grounds, are getting together to create events. And we'll see some of those in just a minute that are in some ways kind of like jaw-dropping, of course I would go there, events. But I just wanted to give you a slide that had not a whole lot of text on it. So. The private clubs and upscale fishing shores, we talked about this a little bit. Bright Lights, Japanese fishing grounds, Jewish fishing grounds, Haupt Pavilion, Battleground Hotel. What I'm sure Kevin Garrity will get in greater detail about, and I'll just mention here, is that if you have a private club and there are county and city ordinances against doing certain things at your private club, you often engage in doing these things. So especially during Prohibition, there's loads of articles in the local newspapers about raids, especially on Bright Lights Club, where evidently there was an ongoing smuggling of liquor. You'd have a boat smuggle it in off Chesapeake, come up Back River, and middle of the night start dropping this stuff off. Let's talk about Haupt's. Haupt's was slightly different than Avondale. I've introduced you to Avondale with its big, let's get 1,500 people in here. Haupt's, right there, Charles Mont Park area, a little bit different. Here's his Bear Creek Hotel, which is right up, just north of Charles Mont, right up near Battle Acre, let's just say that. The public are respectfully informed that the Bear Creek Hotel is now open for the reception of company who will be accommodated with every comfort and luxury. First thing, comfort and luxury. None of these other fishing grounds are selling that. Haupt's is selling comfort and luxury. So as to blend the rural pleasures of the country, How many of you live on Patapsco Neck, maybe in kind of a somewhat rural environment compared to the city? Do you have rural pleasures? Evidently they did then. It may not really have been a thing, but he was selling it. Quite the marketing guy. So to blend the rural pleasures of the country with more fashionable recreations of the city.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Well, actually, a lot of, I'm not big on it, I read that we had we were considered a lot of country, and that's why we have fewer cemeteries here, because of their practice that, I don't know if it still is, but at the time they had to be buried out in the country. So if you go down German Hill Road, and
Right.
you have several, because we were country.
Right. Right across from the Methodist Meeting House, the old,
Yeah.
yeah, right across from there. I was looking through that headstones there the other night on Find a Grave. I was like, wow, there's a lot of folks buried there. My gosh. Boats will be supplied to fishing parties and a large ark. I'm not how large, but it seems to be different than a boat. And a large ark, built expressly for the purpose, can be obtained for a company of ladies and gentlemen who will be protected by its accommodations from sun or rain. Well, in other ads, he describes that ark. And the ark just means the boat has an awning to protect you from the sun and to protect you from the rain. The awning can be pulled down over the sides to a certain extent to protect you from driving rain. And the seats and gunnels are cushioned. So that's the difference between the ark and the other boats. Dinners and suppers will be supplied at the shortest notice. Soft crabs and every other delicacy, when in season, will be furnished in profusion. And in short, every exertion will be made by the proprietor to promote the comfort and pleasure of his guests. Henry T. Houck, who's the eldest son of Jacob Houck of Houck's Panacea fame. On the right, this is here because it's Defenders Day weekend.
You know, a year?
Yeah, this is 1839.
So this is when they were doing the 25th anniversary.
Right. 12 September, Bear Creek Hotel, North Point Battleground. The public are informed that the mammoth green turtle, weighing upwards of 200 pounds, will be served up for dinner on the 12th and 13th instant at 2 o'clock. There will be a private table for ladies and families. Wouldn't want you mixing with those non-ladies. The different boat clubs and the regatta may be expected between 10 and 11 o'clock. The steamer Southerner starts at 9 o'clock a.m. and 3 p.m. Henry T. Houck. Well, this is really interesting. Like a 200-pound green turtle.
That's a big turtle.
That's a big turtle. How common is that? How do you cook it? Do you really want to serve it on 2 different nights? Do you want leftovers of green turtle? Lots of interesting questions here.
That's probably
But then there's also this interesting word, regatta. Oh, that elicits my attention. Let's take a look at that. 2 different articles. Prize cup. We have been shown a very handsome silver cup, which is to be presented on the memorable 12th of September to the winning boat at Bear Creek, where on that day several boat clubs are preparing to contend for the prize. The beauty and workmanship of the cup does credit to the manufacturer, Mr. Andrew E. Warner, who executed it for Henry T. Houck of the Bear Creek Hotel, North Point. Marketing at its best. I want people to show up. I'm not just going to have a regatta. I'm going to have a regatta with a winning chalice that people will want to see. And here's the story on the regatta. The boat race on the 12th was certainly one of the longest and strongest pulls that has ever been witnessed in our harbor and bay. The boat started from the county wharf in fine style, so the county wharf in the city, in fine style, manned by good men and true, and each exerted every skill to win the goal at Houck's, 15 miles distant from the city. It's a 15-mile boat race. The Zuleika came in first after an hour and a quarter's hard tugging. That's 12 miles an hour. That is fast. So I bothered to look at, well, like Olympic level shell racing, what are we at for winning times? It's the equivalent of that, like 14 miles an hour. It's better. It's better by a lot than 12 miles an hour. But considering the materials they're working with, the kind of training they have, holy cow, yes.
A question, and I'm not familiar, because Balber City did not take over what we know as Balber City until 1917. Parts of Canton, Fells Point were Balber County, so when they say county, pier, wharf, whatever, it really might have been county property. I just wondered if you knew that compared to like maybe half a mile up was actually Balber City then.
Well, you're absolutely correct. So the answer once again is I don't know.
Okay.
But the fact that they say we'll leave from County Wharf, I know that the city had 2 different city wharves, and then there's all the private wharves. So it would not surprise me to find out that there was a county wharf in
That's what
the
we
city.
consider Balber City.
But I'm not going to bet any money on it. Certainly not any money. Excellent
I
point.
always
Thank you.
heard, I never heard it called Bear Creek Hotel. I thought it was called Swan Harbor.
Well, so this started
That's
out.
what he started out as, Bear Creek.
This started out as the Battleground Hotel, and then it changed to the Bear Creek Hotel. And then at some point that was purchased. They tried to sell it a couple of different times, and I haven't found the sales slip yet to find that answer. So after an hour and a quarter's hard tugging, next came the Philadelphia boat, the Chesapeake, with not knowing the right track, got entangled among the grass in the creek. The Atlanta followed next, and the Osceola, a boat that was that morning barely completed, and tried without slush or dubbing, followed in her wake. The prize cup was of course awarded to the Zelika. The day was favorable, and the water was not very rough, though a fresh breeze was blowing at the time. Numbers of persons rode down to Houck's, where they regaled themselves upon calapash and calipee with the members of the clubs to whom the boats belong. Two words I have never come across. Does anybody know what calapash and calipee are? My jaw hit the ground when I looked them up. Calapash is that meat directly under the upper turtle shell, and calipee is that turtle meat directly on the lower shell. So
And the shell is
literally,
on the Caprice.
so literally, they're sitting here referring to the other article, saying, oh yeah, they had that ginger pound turtle, and it was fun.
It must have been some good stuff.
So yeah, so this is another thing that you find, is that although this is the story of one regatta, this regatta and other regattas went on for several years, I say many years, not always involving Bear Creek. It might be leave the city and go to another location, but often involving Bear Creek. We're almost at the end. So, in academia, we have this thing, I think anthropologists started it. It's too theoretical for historians to have done. And it's called material culture. Material culture is the study of artifacts. It's the study of stuff. And in that study, you pose questions like, how far did the society have to go? What did they have to know in order to produce this thing I'm holding in my hand? So if we just take a look at the blue bottles on the top of that chest there, you begin to ask the question, well, okay, that had to be made. Could that have been made in 300 AD? Could it have been made in 1000 BC? Or did it have to wait for other things to happen? How much knowledge did people have to have in order to make that in Baltimore? If it was made in Baltimore, what access did they need to various materials, so on and so forth? That's material culture. We're not going to do that with any of this. But what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at what these places offered, what they had. So Houck's Pavilion is going to be sold at auction. All that valuable property known as Houck's Pavilion, situated on the Patapsco Neck on the North Point Road, distance from Baltimore 7.5 miles, containing 43 1/4 acres. This old and well-established summer resort, whose beautiful location and natural advantages have long been the admiration of all visitors, is now offered for public sale, together with the improvement, land, and fixtures. The dwellings have recently been thoroughly repaired, together with the addition of 3 elegant dining rooms, a ballroom, and a large and well-arranged bar room, all new and at a cost of $1,200. The building contains 15 rooms with a summer kitchen and a smokehouse, with large private yard and a commodious cellar, a large barn, and stabling sufficient for 12 horses, a granary, an ice house, a carriage house, with every convenience for an establishment of the kind. The land is kind and well adapted to farming and gardening. It also has the advantage of, and they talk about a gunning ground for duck hunting.
And where was this?
This is at Houck's Pavilion.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So not even Houck's Battleground Hotel. This is the pavilion, which is pretty amazing. So when we hear that the pavilion was designed from day one to be kind of a sumptuous place, this gives you an idea. Yeah, it
And now it's
was.
just a little empty field, just sitting
Right.
when you have to go on it.
We have a large class of, or we have a landing for steamboats or bay craft, and also have a good boat landing. The house is doing a very profitable business, averaging $800 a month, and with a trifling outlay, the business could be doubled. Terms of the sale are 1/2 cash on day of sale, balance on a credit of 6 months, with interest and approved security. I think this is a great example of letting you know. I think we can kind of get a feel for what the people were receiving when they got to Avondale. Until you read this, it's less clear what the people were getting when they stayed at Houck's Pavilion or went to Houck's Pavilion. I think this spells that out fairly clearly. There's another ad that I wasn't able to find once again. The danger of doing online searching is if you don't save that interesting thing right away, and you go back and try and recreate the path to where you found it, you never find it again. There's another great one that lists all of the glassware, stemware, liquors, you name it, the number of boats, all that were sold in addition to this. Oh. It's sending me a message, and I'm just saying, remind me tomorrow. The feasts. The Butcher's Barbecue. The novel sight of a whole ox roasting for an open fire was enjoyed at the monumental fishing grove on Bear Creek yesterday by about 2,000 persons. The commodious steamer Louise carried down the major portion of the excursionists, making 3 trips for that purpose, while over 200 carriages arrived on the grounds. That's a very important point. The fact that you could get 200 carriages from the city out to this location shows that the roads may not have been many in number, but they were good enough to get the carriages out there. I don't know exactly what year we're talking about here, but
Where was Monumental Set again? I'm sorry, I cut you off. Where is that about?
so Monumental Fishing Grove is
Ridge Creek?
right after you enter.
Sorry.
Monumental Fishing Grounds.
That is up
so
past
you're-
Chesterwood.
So you're coming up Bear Creek from the entrance, Solars Point, Avondale, and then up here at the head of this.
So you're almost at the top. No, you're not at the top of Bear Creek. You're
Oh,
at the
no.
bottom. Okay,
Yeah.
I know where you're
Yeah.
at now.
You're down at the bottom.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Last Monday, the finest ox at the cattle scales, weighing 1,350 pounds, was selected for the roast and conveyed yesterday morning to the grounds by 4 horses in a truck brought specially from Philadelphia for the purpose. At 10 o'clock, he was butchered by Aaron Baron Crozier, his hind legs being drawn up by a block and tackle and his throat cut. He was dressed by Nicholas Tagues, president of the Maryland Centennial Butchers Association, John Warner and Henry Gable, in 4.5 minutes. He was dressed a 1,350-pound ox in 4.5 minutes. Now notice that this isn't an event that's meant to draw people out there. This is an event created by the butchers of Baltimore City who are doing this for themselves at this location. They've got the best butchers, and there's some level of pride and ego going into this dressing. Yeah. 4.5 minutes. A large hole was dug in the ground in which was placed an iron grate to hold the coal. Over this, 2 large iron tripods supported a stout pole on which the beef was spitted and held in place by large iron skewers, driven through and through the carcass. An iron crank at either end of the pole served to turn the ox from time to time as the cooking progressed, the fire being about 3 feet below the huge mass. The fire was started at roughly 10:30 a.m., and at 3:30 p.m. in the afternoon, the multitude of anxious visitors were served bread and roasted potatoes being added to the savory slices of smoking hot beef. The Monumental Fishing Club joined in the festivities and were presented by yada, 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 yada. When we talk about 200-pound turtles, when we talk about 1,350-pound oxes, there's this really interesting history of lots of people coming to just enjoy community and eating large amounts. Anybody here speak German? There's this phrase called Gemütlichkeit. And it's just this sense of good times, happiness, so on and so forth. And that's the kind of thing that I think it's important for us to understand, is that across all those different fishing grounds and across all the different articles in the newspaper, and there's hundreds of articles in the newspaper and ads and things like that, across all these different years, it's hard to boil down like, okay, so what does this mean? And I think the answer is that it means that Bear Creek, Patapsco Neck, was the place the people of the city of Baltimore liked to come, that was close by, to enjoy life when they had the opportunity to enjoy
This
life.
was a getaway.
Yeah. And I think for kids today in school, at John Stricker, kids today in school at Bear Creek, elementary, stuff like that, it may be hard for them to understand that. For kids and relatively new residents who have the backwater waste treatment plant that they're trying to deal with,
Hollywood Park.
yeah, it's hard for them to get their head around what a great place this was. Now, it was a great place that societally we still had not grown into integration and things like that, but at least we had the forethought to say, okay, we need to have these days for African Americans to come here. We need to have these days for the poor. It's not just a place for the rich. And here we are, the last one. You've made it, you've endured. Bear Creek was once the recreational center for Baltimore City. The natural wealth of the creek and Patapsco Neck made it a destination for fishing, ducking, swimming, boating, feasting. And for me, the important point is the good of the community was exhibited along Bear Creek. The organizations in the city of Baltimore and in the county who, when they didn't need to, raised the money to get the newspaper kids out there, the kids from the orphans home out there, and I can keep on going, the folks who are living in poverty and have the least, to at least try and get them out there for some level of enjoyment, to shine some light into their lives. To me, that's the huge point of this. Because when I look at society today, when I look at the city of Baltimore today, and also New York City, where I'm from, we've reached an era where a lot of this stuff is expected from the municipality. The city is expected to have the parks. The city is expected to have the events. The city is expected to do this. The state, the federal government. And I think we sometimes forget that it's equal opportunity for both the private sector and the community to do it. And this was a time when it seemed to work fairly well. That's all that I've got, and I just wanted to thank you for sitting through it. And if there's any questions, I'm
Contributions. I'm gonna finish here though, we can ask questions.
sure.
Okay?